Hello, my name is Adrian and I realized this video to the group project of Glocal Awarness, and I'll use the theory of state dimension to compare the experience and contrast the experience of the group member. So I'll start with the long-term orientation, and with my experience and the experience of Laure and Nathan that are in USA, we share the same idea, and it's true that ASA and USA are in the low part of the long-term orientation because they have a strong culture, and their capability to accept change and accept the cultural change is a bit complicated because they have strong culture. So it's completely different from France and China with the experience of Nina, because in France and in China is cultural is the long-term orientation is high because they accept and they are aware of cultural change and they are ready to accept it. Now we can move on the concept of individualism dimension, and after the experience of Nathan and Laure that are in USA and me in South Africa and Nina in China, it's true that France, USA and ASA are more individualism society because the success is a bit selfish compared to China, where they want to succeed in group. Now I can speak about the uncertainty abundance, and after our experience, it's true that China, USA, and South Africa it's quite similar because they are very relaxed at works, as they are prepared to manage situation without information compared to the France, which is very not flexible, and they always want all of the information to prepare and to adapt a situation. So the capacity of adaptation is very rigid in France and very flexible in South Africa, USA, and China. The last part would be the concept of indulgence. And after our experience, for Nathan and Laure that are in USA, it's true that people are not shy to show their money. And for me, it's the same. In South Africa, people are not shy to show that they have Ferrari and that there is a lot of poverty. So there is no taboo around the money compared to the France and China, where is the success is quite taboo and it's very complicated to show that you have money in France. And with the experience of Nina in China, it's very the same, that the indulgence in China is very low because they cannot do exactly what they want with their money.
Hello, and today I'm going to talk about the difference between China, South Africa, and United States concerning the language barrier. So, concerning South Africa, Adrian shared with us his experience on the language barrier as he's studying there. Compared to France, the nonverbal language, whether it is the body language or the facial expression, is extremely present, which makes things a little easier for foreigners who come to France. Concerning South Africa, what set up the language barrier, the fact that there are two communities, the whites and the blacks. In South Africa, it's not taboo to talk about skin color. The whites speak almost only Afrikaans and have no non-verbal language, which is a bit complicated for foreigners, and the blacks speak different language and have a non-verbal language that is very present, and it's part of their culture. So to conclude on South Africa, the barrier is the language barrier is very present, as they speak many languages and it's complicated to learn. I'm now going to talk about Laure's experience in United States, in Raleigh. She's studying there, and it is true that the language barrier can create incomprehension. In her case, the language barrier was not felt on the English itself, which is really academic, but rather during discussion with Americans. The expression and the speed of the dialogue can make it difficult to understand. And finally, the language barrier in this case is based on the lack of vocabulary, and the condition must be ideal to communicate to take place. So slowly, with no noise around, and etc. Now I'm going to talk about Nathan in the United States. Like Laura, it's quite difficult to communicate with American because they use expression from there. And as Nathan says, they tend to express 10 different ideas when they only want to say one. So it can be difficult to understand when you have a lack of vocabulary. This kind of thing can make the discussion a bit complicated. Nathan was able to point out that he was a rather shy person, and this did not help him to talk to people. Also, he noticed that Americans can have short conversation, contrary to French. In the end, all of this helped him with shyness and pushed him to go and talk to new people. To conclude, I'm going to talk quickly about my experience. I decided to talk about a trip to China because I'm still in France for study. So the language barrier in China is extremely present, and it's true that English is the most speaking language in the world. But China is very big and have many small villages, and over there they don't speak English, only Old Chinese. So I went 2 times in China. It was a bit complicated to communicate, but communicating in China can be a real challenge if travelers don't speak Chinese. So and if they decide to visit small village outside of the capital, so you have to find different solutions to communicate a little bit, such as simple question during the usual life.
Now I will talk about the concept of nonverbal communication and its importance in a specific culture, as well as the differences in this area for each different cultures. For this, I will discuss and compare the experience of each member of my group that we have discussed all together. I will start by saying that gesture and nonverbal behavior are a very important part of communications. These are habits that you develop growing up in a certain community, and they obviously can vary between the different cultures. This is something that surprised me a lot during my stay because this gesture has almost become instinctive for me and seemed universal, which is not the case. To give you the example of our experiences, I will start by talking about the case of Adrien, which is actually quite similar to Laura's case and mine. All French, we are used to do la bise, which are kisses on the cheek to say hello. Adrien is in South Africa, and this way of kissing to say hello does not exist. At the beginning of his stay, Adrien was kissing people to say hi, and they were just looking at him like if he was crazy, because it's like way too intimate for them. And it's the same way for Laure and me, who are in the United States. At first, I had the reflex to approach people, trying to kiss them on the cheek, and they just didn't understand what I was trying to do. Here in the United States, they tend to hug more easily than we do in France. They actually use the hug to say hello. And it just feels very weird, especially for Laure, since she was telling me that because she's a girl, American girl, hug her all the time, even when they just met to say hello, and it just leave a weird feeling since she was not used to it.
So now we are talking about the cultural shock. So the cultural shock can be defined as a disorientation felt by a person confronted with an unfamiliar way of life. So while discussing with my friend, we realized that depending on the country where you live, the cultural shocks are not the same. So Nathan and I both lived in Raleigh, United States. So we have experienced much the same things in this new country for us. One thing I have noticed is the short conversations. In France, it's not common, but here, as soon as I go to a place, the saleswoman, for example, chat with me, ask me how I am or what I do in life. If I start a short conversation like this in France, people will think I'm weird or not common to the French culture. So it was a cultural shock for me first when I arrived in United States, but also when I returned to France at Christmas, because I had uncored this American habits in mind. Also, Adrian is currently in South Africa, so which has a different culture than France and than United States, and the one that Nathan and I are experiences in the United States. So Adrian brought up one thing that struck him when he arrived in this new country. He noticed that the inhabitants lived in a different way that we do in France. They get up very early, around 5 a.m. They have lunch at 11 a.m. and have dinner at 6 p.m. So to be well integrated in South Africa, you have to adapt to their rhythm of life. Of course, it's a cultural shock for him because he comes from France, and in France we tend to do everything later than them. But this cultural difference is the same here in the United States. Students and workers get up very early and eat very early too. So the first person in my group is Nina, and she took a trip to China and noted cultural differences. For example, she found it very shocking to see people spitting in the streets. In France, it's thrown upon to spit. It's vulgar, and people don't like this at all. But there in China, it's a normal custom, and it's anchored in the Chinese culture. Moreover, when she went to restaurants, she realized that most of them only served dishes to share. In France, there are restaurants like this, but the majority of restaurants remain restaurants where everyone order their own dish, as well as here in the United States. So all these cultural differences show how complicated it can be to move from one country to another. Indeed, between these four countries, so France, China, United States, and South Africa, we can realize that the cultural shock are very present and very different. It also depends on the point of view of each person, because someone can be more marked by a cultural difference than another.